Hello! I'm LegenTerry, and these are my first impressions of the Elden Ring Nightreign network test. Elden Ring is a title that's undeniably popular, as are its developers Fromsoftware and its lead game director Hidetaka Miyazaki. Over the last 2 years, or, much longer for those actually keeping score, the company has gathered hordes of players beneath the banner to test their combat skills against massive bosses, their dexterity against environmental challenges, and their knowledge against a mountain of esoteric lore. So, when Miyazaki goes hands-off and lets his team build a spin-off cooperative multiplayer game that borrows mechanics from places like Hades, Fortnite, and DayZ, it's anything but business as usual. Now, before we get started, I want to ask you to keep in mind that what we got to play was only the network test version of the game that had a limited amount of content, and that the full game doesn't release until May 30th. I can only speak on stuff I personally experienced, and the things that FromSoft themselves have revealed about what's coming in the total package. So for now, let's crack this thing wide open and answer the obvious questions. What exactly is Elden Ring Nightreign? At its core, it's a completely standalone PvE co-op roguelike game. You're expected to go on pretty lengthy runs that can last somewhere between 20 minutes to an hour while amassing as much power as possible before fighting major bosses at the end of each in-game day. One of the largest major differences is that there are no created characters in this game. Instead, you choose from one of a handful of character classes with unique abilities on top of the standard gear and weapons that you find. But more on that later. So, what makes this an Elden Ring game? Well, imagine if you took the combat, the enemies, and some of the environmental assets from the original game, placed them all in an alternate universe version of the starting zone Limgrave called Limveld, and then surrounded it with a ring of fiery blue rain that slowly collapses inwards towards the middle of the map. You and 2 other friendly players are dropped into Limveld via Spectral Hawk at one of a few predetermined spots. Your running speed is cranked up to roughly double time, and you're able to parkour up most ledges like a spider monkey. Also, your momentum is completely unhindered with the removal of fall damage, which is pretty important when you're bounding around the map at Mach 5. Your number one objective is to search across the map for encampments, castles, and specific locations that many bosses reside in, because they'll drop the most runes used to level up your character, the highest quality weapons, and buffs that make your build stronger. Oh, and when you level up at Sites of Grace, stat bumps are automatically applied. Plus, there's actually not any armor pieces in this game. It's all been streamlined for brevity. No time to worry about defense, equip loads, or fashion while the Nightreign is nipping at your heels. While the combat remains the same exercise in patience, maneuverability, and clever build crafting, the upgrade in base movement speed and the addition of 2 other players along with their skills completely changes the way you can approach fights. Smaller enemies kind of feel like cannon fodder just begging to be slaughtered by your team, but for the most part, they're not really worth the time and effort it takes to put them down unless the area they patrol interferes with your hunt for loot. Larger enemies and bosses have been given bigger health pools and more rapid attack patterns to keep them feeling dangerous, and sometimes you'll even be forced to deal with more than one at a time. But let's roll things back for a moment so I can kind of detail how a full run plays out in practice. It starts with your choice of character class. In the network test, we only had access to 4 different archetypes, but the full game is supposed to offer at least 8 with more planned as DLC. The ones we got to play as were the Wilder, the Guardian, the Duchess, and the Recluse. Each class has a kind of role they fulfill within the party using their unique abilities. One passive ability, one character skill with a shorter cooldown, and an ultimate art with a longer cooldown. The Wilder is the poster child of the game and a pretty generic soldier type character. His starting loadout includes a short sword and a buckler along with decent HP, FP, and stamina all around. He has a passive ability that allows him to survive one attack that would normally kill him, which is really nice for both beginners and hardcore players. His first ability, the Claw Shot, either pulls him in closer to the enemy or the enemy in closer to him depending on their size, but can also be used in the field to get better positioning. His ultimate art, Onslaught Stake, creates a massive explosion at his location, damaging enemies and launching himself backwards to safety. It also gets invincibility frames during the animation. The Guardian is a literal Birdman hybrid that begins with a polearm and a large shield, and as such, he's the tankiest of the classes. This is further supported by his passive, a heavy guard that you activate by blocking and dodging at the same time. His first ability is a whirlwind that erupts and knocks smaller targets around him up into the air, giving allies some free time to score some hits or to heal up. His ultimate art, Wings of Salvation, has him leap and hover in the air momentarily before dive bombing the area, devastating everything beneath him and giving everyone nearby a defense buff if you hold it down. The Duchess is your dexterous assassin type blended with some fantastic support features, who happens to start with a dagger and a very fragile health bar. Her passive ability allows her to dodge twice consecutively with more iframes. Her first ability, Restage, allows her to reenact the last few seconds of damage dealt to an enemy as displayed on an illusory copy of them. And her ultimate art, Finale, makes your whole team invisible, or at least obscured enough that enemies won't target you all directly with attacks. It lasts for roughly 10 seconds, and it doesn't break immediately when you attack with it active. Last, but certainly not least, is the Recluse, a magic wielder that starts with a glintstone staff and plays best at a distance. Of the 4 classes available, she has the trickiest loadout to understand, and that's partially due to FromSoft cutting FP restoring flasks from this game specifically. Her passive ability, called Elemental Defense, allows her to do a couple of things. Firstly, whenever enemies and allies take damage from any source, they're left with different colors of affinity residues on their person that she can see. Blue for magic, red for fire, yellow for lightning, and gold for holy. Using her first ability, Magic Cocktail, she absorbs that residue, which gives her back some of her FP. Once 3 residues have been collected, her 4th cast of Magic Cocktail will create a spell based on the combination of colors she collected. One of 12 different spells, to be exact. Thankfully, her ultimate ability, Soul Blood Song, is much more simple. She locks into a lengthy animation complete with iframes for a few seconds, then creates an AoE burst that marks nearby enemies with blood sigils. Whenever that enemy is attacked, their attacker recovers health and FP. Of the 4, my favorites were probably the Wilder and the Recluse. They were also my most successful, being the 2 classes I actually completed runs with. I really like the Duchess. Her restage ability feels completely busted, so it'll probably get reworked by the time the actual game comes out. But until she gets to level 3 or 4, she just doesn't have enough health or poise to survive more than a couple of hits, which means you have to play with her very, very carefully. The Guardian was fun too, but his Whirlwind ability is literally useless against bosses that are larger than human-sized, and there's no real way to keep an enemy's aggro locked onto him, making the whole point of him being a tank kind of awkward. Now, just to be clear, I'm not saying that they're bad, especially in the right hands. There are definitely ways to build into those characters' strengths, like stacking a bunch of health and attack power and communicating to your teammates that they should be taking passive buffs that reduce the enemy's likelihood of targeting them. But they're going to be harder to work around if you play with strangers who don't use mics. The Wilder looks kind of simple at first glance, but his mobility is crazy good. You can do stuff with the Claw Shot ability, like use it to zip away from big incoming attacks, or combo it with his Onslaught stake to quickly stagger bosses and save an ally who's in danger. The Recluse feels like a glass cannon, but her dodge gets some extra distance, and she has the advantage of staying at a long range. I do wish there was a way to separate her Magic Cocktail absorption ability from the actual spellcasting portion. I can't tell you how many times I got stuck casting something in the heat of battle when I didn't have time to check how many of the bubbles were filled in. I think we could also use some text indicating what that spell will be after she absorbs a 3rd residue, because memorizing all of those is going to be a pain. Know what isn't that much of a pain? Helping me out by clicking the like button and especially subscribing to the channel. I really want to get over 1,000 subscribers as soon as possible so publishers begin taking my channel seriously and sending me early review codes. Early codes mean my review videos come out when embargoes lift alongside everyone else's videos, rather than weeks later. Less of a headache for me and more rapid reviews for you. It's really a win-win scenario, so thanks in advance for being awesome. So, after you've chosen a class, you begin a run by flying and dropping in along one of the edges of Limveld. Your first order of business should be opening up the map and marking a spot that you want to check out. Everyone else will either fall in line or mark their own spots, and then you can kind of coordinate with them to head towards one of the markers as a unit. At this stage, going lone wolf means you're going to die pretty fast. It is paramount that you all get enough souls to hit level 2 right away, as it basically doubles your health pool. Once you take out your first mini-boss, or get lucky scavenging some piles of crates and chests, you're gonna find a few things. Weapons that drop can be used by any class. You aren't restricted by any stats here. The only thing that matters is whether or not you're high enough level to wield them. They're color-coded based on rarity and level requirements like other RPGs, going from white to blue, purple, and yellow. Also, you're going to see a lot of familiar weapon names, with randomized Ash of War abilities, sorceries, and incantations, but they also come with passive abilities on them. These will make up the core of your character's build for the run. As long as you carry them in one of your available 6 slots, their effects will work for you. You might not be excited to use that particular weapon, but you don't really need to. Just stick with your starting weapon until you find an actual upgrade. You can hold up to 4 consumable items, which have slightly altered effects from the original counterparts. I'm not going to go over all of these, but some are much better to keep handy than others. You also have 2 slots for talismans, which drop from dung beetles and some other sources. Now, all the items that drop in the game are shared between players, so if 2 of you want the same thing that's sitting on the ground, one of you is getting left out to dry. But you can also drop items on the ground for your teammates. So if you find something that you're not interested in, but you know that your ally will be, you can carry it around until you meet up again and give it away to them. The exception to this shared looting rule is drops from bosses, as they come in a cache full of 3 items that you get to choose one from, and each player gets their own. You can still select an item and then drop it later, but the cache itself is yours alone to loot. Also, rather than weapons or items, there's a chance that you'll find buffs that apply to your character instead. These all have their use cases, but some are way cooler than others. Stuff like having a constant Great Blade Phalanx sorcery on your character that refreshes itself every few seconds, or the ability to make your Crimson Flask heal everyone else nearby whenever you take a swig. Once you get to grips with all of that, it's time to start sprinting, because the day is ending and the Ring of Nightreign will start closing in faster than you think. When it begins to reach its smallest size, the location gets marked both on the map and in the skies overhead with a ghostly golden Erd tree. This is where the first night's major boss will spawn, so I hope you're prepared for the fight with enough gear and healing, because you'll probably need it. Despite having even the best preparation in the world, shit happens. At some point you'll probably die, either by something seemingly random like an enemy switching targets in the middle of their attack pattern or, skill issue. But it isn't the end. If you go down, you'll enter a near-death state for a short period so your allies can revive you. But you don't just walk over to someone and hold down a button to revive them in Nightreign, you pick them up by jabbing them with your weapon or blasting them with magic. It doesn't really make any sense, but it's a lot more fun. The first time you go down, you'll have one of these 3 purple segments filled in that your allies will have to break through to pick you up. The more often you go down, the more segments get added and the more time it takes to revive you. If you're still in the daytime when you die and your near-death state runs out, you'll respawn at a nearby site of grace automatically, but you'll lose a level and drop all the runes that you had gathered on that spot. However, if your entire team gets knocked out at the same time during the night's boss fight, your run will officially end. But you're better than that, right? So, after overcoming the boss, the next day begins and the Nightreign clears away to the edges of the map once more. This is your second and last chance to explore the map, level up higher, and collect more stuff. The cycle repeats until the Nightreign closes in and another, more difficult boss appears. If you are able to defeat it, your team is drawn up into another dimension where the doors to the final boss lie. You're given time to spend any leftover runes on levels, purchase items from a vendor, or rank up weapons if you happen to be carrying smithing stones that correspond to their rarity. And then, you all push open the gates and step over the threshold into the boss's domain. In the full version of the game, you'll be able to choose one of 8 final bosses to pursue before you begin your run. But here in the network test, we were only permitted to fight Gladius, a Cerberus-like 3-headed hound that barks with fire magic and swings around a chain with a massive sword attached to the end. He also periodically splits into 3 individual entities, making it much more difficult to manage when they all target a single player. This fight, on its own, was really challenging, but it's pretty likely that you won't even reach it. In the 12 hours that I played, that's 4 sessions that ran for 3 hours each, I only got in a handful of attempts at it. And there were a few times when we did make it, only to be crushed by heartbreaking defeat moments before we could claim victory. But when we did win, it was awesome. Celebratory dance sessions included. Whether or not you succeed, you'll get a handful of relics of different colors that you can equip on your characters when you go back to the Round Table Hold, so there is some long-term progress that carries over. Between the teammates I was paired with, the locations we chose to scout out, the randomness of the loot drops that we found, and the nightly bosses that we had to battle, there was quite a lot of variety that made it an addicting experience. The game's director, Junya Ishizaki, a longtime FromSoft veteran, has said that the map in the full game won't remain static as it did in the network test. Procedurally generated areas like forests, volcanoes, and poison swamps will appear and change the overall layout, making every run more unique. Which is definitely a good thing, as by the end of my time with the network test, I had almost every location and the mini-boss spawn points memorized. I came away very excited to play the full game when it comes out on May 30th, and there are some neat things that I didn't even get around to mentioning, like the fact that Margit can randomly invade your game and relentlessly hunt down one of your players, or that there are bosses from the original Dark Souls games included too. Besides that stuff, I do have a few lingering questions and some hesitation regarding the game's formula. First and foremost, they've said that there is no crossplay between platforms. Maybe this changes down the road, but if you want to play with your friends for now, you had better check in with them and figure out where you all want to play together. Also, you can currently only play this game with a party of 3. You have to either queue in solo and be matched with randoms, or go in with 2 friends. No playing alone, and no duos. though they have said they're gauging players' interest in those options for the future. Thirdly, this is only a $40 title, but it still relies on a connection to a server, which isn't free for them to keep running forever. Thanks to the Steam page for the game accidentally being updated early, we know it's going to receive post-launch DLC in the form of more character classes and bosses. While that might keep the lights on for a while, I could definitely see a future where they try out different forms of monetization. The most obvious to me being new skins for each character. That's just speculation at this point, and they said they're not doing it, but it's kind of the industry standard, so it would be strange if it didn't eventually happen as long as the game stays popular. Now, with the more serious stuff out of the way, I'm going to build some constructive criticism about the content that we got to play. There are some caves on the map that lead to mines. The only thing that I ever found exploring the mines were smithing stones, and only the first level of smithing stones. Add on to that, the mines are so labyrinthian and stretched so far that they really just felt like bait. If the Nightreign ring closed in while you were deep in the mine, you were just completely screwed. If they aren't made a little easier to search, there should be much better rewards for going anywhere near the mines. I learned to just avoid them completely, and it looked like all my teammates did as well. Next, and I know these are things that have always been issues with the Souls games, the targeting system and the leashing. This is a multiplayer game where you're often fighting against 5 or more enemies at the same time, and the targeting system never wants to lock onto the enemy that you're looking at directly the first time. It was definitely not created with the assumption that it would be put into a multiplayer setting, and I really want FromSoft to figure something out with that for the future. And then there's enemy leashing. Whenever something big gets a little too far away from its spawn location, it starts to disappear and then shows up somewhere else. I absolutely despise this, especially against dragons. Why would you even make an enemy that can fly 3 miles away in the middle of a fight if it's going to happen? Either keep their behavior more stationary or increase the size of their territory so it doesn't happen. I mean, just look at this mess. There's gotta be something they can do about it. Anyways, that's enough ranting for now. Nightreign might have a few problems, but nothing that stops it from being really fun and addicting. I played what was essentially a demo of the game for 12 hours and I still feel like I didn't get my fill. If you're interested in the game and want to see what a pretty average run looks like, I uploaded one of mine to the channel on the day the network test began. The full game comes out on May 30th for $40 USD, and I will definitely be picking it up. This has been LegenTerry, and I'll see you around next time.